Hi everybody, it's Brian and we're back with some more Fusion 360 tutorials. So right now we're going to do this wheel. This is lesson number 4 and this is all about revolves. So if you've been following along up until this point, almost all of our exercises have dealt with extrusions. And so now we're going to shift gears a little bit and deal with revolve. So revolve is used anytime you have a geometry that is symmetrical about a center axis point. And so if we look at this wheel, if I zoom around here, you can see it's a wheel. The geometry is identical and it's based out of this sort of like center axis point of the middle of this cylinder. We can probably best see this if we look at a section view. So I'm going to switch over to my drawing here, this object. And if we look at a section view, so if you don't know what a section view is, we take the object, we cut through it. So think about if I took this wheel and I sliced through the middle of this with a bandsaw, and my section view is actually showing me I'm looking at this side of the wheel, right? So just this half from a top-down view, right? So if I look at that side of the wheel after I've cut it in half, what you'll see here, if I zoom in for a second, is that these little crossed hatch lines are indicating anywhere that that saw blade would have touched, and that this empty space between the geometry lines is open airspace. So like this space here happens to be the hole inside the wheel. These spaces here is this empty space here and on the other side of that wheel, right? And then this is the actual geometry that we want. So the beautiful thing about revolves is they can actually, for the most part, be really easy to draw. You get a very complex geometry with a very minimal sort of drawing set. And so what we actually, all we need to worry about if we're drawing this wheel is drawing one half. So if I think about the axis of symmetry is running right down through the middle of the wheel here, right? So all I need to worry about is drawing this half on this side. So it's, you know, it's like these lines here, make up that half. Now, talking about drawing efficiency and mirroring, like we did last time with the mirror planes, we can be even more efficient here. Because you see there's another axis of symmetry here, right? There's a line that goes through this way, and that geometry is symmetrical above and below that line. So all I actually need to do is draw 1/4 of this wheel, mirror that section over, and then we revolve it around to get this geometry. Couple things before we get into this. You'll see there's a nice little fillet here to soften those edges on both sides. That I'm going to do as a separate step. I'm not going to draw those fillets in to the sketch. I'm going to use the feature to create the fillet after the fact. So that makes our sketch even simpler. We don't have to worry about any of those curved lines. It actually makes it easier to dimension things inside the sketch. So really quickly, you can download this PDF so you have it in front of you, but these are the values that we need to create this sketch. So really quick, before we jump into this, how did I make this? It's really simple. There's a sketch, and if you see it sort of phantom highlighted there on the screen, there's a revolve, and then there's one fillet that deals with all of those fillets. And I'll show you, this is kind of fun. Well, I don't know if fun would be the word you would use. I think it's fun. We're going to do fillets, not just edges. I'm going to be selecting whole surfaces, so we'll talk about that in a second. All right, so if you want to follow along, I think you'll probably get the most out of this if you follow along. I'm going to open a new tab and just redraw this for all of us, and you can follow right along. So again, document settings, we're in millimeters, just double checking that before I do anything. I'm going to go ahead and guess what I'm going to start with? That's right, a sketch. I'm going to go to the Create Sketch menu. I want my wheel to be able to roll, and so I'm going to draw this profile on the top plane. And we are now in our sketch mode. I'm going to start with 2 lines that actually have very little to do with my overall geometry. So I'm going to invoke the line command. I'm going to start at my origin point, and I'm going to pull a vertical line up hit escape to go to the line command. Then I'm going to re-invoke the line command. Again, you can go over here, or if you're super fancy, you can just type L for line. Click the origin point again. I'm going to pull out this way to the right and make sure I get a horizontal line. Like so. Hit escape again. So these two lines are actually going to be construction geometry. So if you remember how we do that, we're going to click on one line. I'm going to hold down the shift key, click on the second line to select them both. And I'm going to invoke the construction button here from our sketch palette. Once I do that, I'm going to hit escape to make sure nothing's selected. Just double check this line. And if I hover over the constraint, it's telling me that this line's vertical. And this line is either horizontal or it's perpendicular to the vertical, which means it's horizontal. So that's it. I'm going to start with those two. This is going to be my mirror line. So if I go back to my drawing, that's this line here. So I'm mirroring about that line to create this wider geometry. And this line here is going to be my axis of symmetry. So again, if I go back to my drawing, that's going to be in the middle of this open hole. Okay, so because that's an open hole, when I start drawing, I want to make sure I'm not starting my drawing on that axis. I need to leave some airspace between that axis and the start point of that line. Okay, so I'm going to do this whole sketch with one line command. So I'm going to type in L for line. Oops, why did that not work? With line command, I guess. I'm going to come down here with my cursor until I land on that construction line that I created, my horizontal construction line. I should see that blue X. And again, I'm giving myself some space from the origin point. I'm moving over to the right. Make sure you see that blue X. That's going to pin the start of that line on that construction line. Then I'm going to come up with a vertical line. I'm not paying too much attention here to size. I'm just trying to capture that sketch. So I create a vertical line. Then I'm going to move over and create a horizontal line. And then I'm going to come down at an angle. This is an angled line, so make sure that you have that angle there. Click. Okay, so I've got my three lines. This line is going to be parallel to my horizon line here, my horizontal line. So you see I just touched down on that line and it started to create that parallel for me. And it's showing you with those two little blue slashes. Click. I'm going to come up with a vertical line, come over with a horizontal line, and then I'm going to come down. And again, I'm going to land on that mirror line. And you'll see it's giving me that light blue perpendicular intersection indicator. Okay, so that's it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines, all done with one line command. So that captures 1/4 of my overall geometry. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit escape to get out of the line command. And I'm going to do a crossing window to select all of these lines, because my next step is I want to mirror what I have here. And so we're not going to mirror this as a feature, we're going to mirror it as a sketch. Very, very similar process. Now we don't need to mirror about a plane, we only need to mirror about a single line, because everything in a sketch is defined on one plane. So I'm going to move my cursor down over here to the far right, and I'm going to do what's called a left crossing window. And with a left crossing window, if I click and let go, or sorry, if I click and hold and pull across, you'll notice that it's a yellow field. Anything that is touching or completely enclosed in that yellow field will be selected. So I'm going to cross over all of that and select those lines. I just want to show you really quickly, there's a slight difference here, so I'm going to hit escape to deselect. If I start up here on the left and I pull to the right, you'll see that it's a different color field, it's that orange field. And now if I literally make the same box but in the opposite direction, if I let go, notice my selection set is different. With the right crossing window, crossing to the right, only things completely contained in that box get highlighted, right? So it only got these guys because this whole line wasn't contained in that box, right? So that's a weird little nuanced thing. This also is the same in AutoCAD. If you have any AutoCAD experience, left and right crossing windows are identical. The reason I'm using a left crossing window, I'm starting here, is because I don't want to get this line, so I can easily start above it and then capture all of those, and you'll see that I get all of those. So that's my selection set, and now I'm going to go ahead and click the mirror line. So I click mirror, objects, it will say 13 selected because I've already selected those. I'm gonna, under mirror line, I'm gonna click the white field and make it blue to select, and then I'm simply gonna select my horizontal line. That's it, I click OK, and now you'll notice that my geometry is complete. Once I have that, I can start to dial in the rest of my dimensions to start to create the exact geometry that I'm looking for this wheel. So I'm going to show you a couple tricks here as well. If we go back here to my drawing and we start to look at some of these dimensions, I want to point out a couple things. First, if I look at what's the dimension of this internal hole, the hub of the wheel, I've given that as it's 20 millimeters, right? The outside point from here to here is 24, and the overall diameter is 80. Now, we are all smart people, right? And we can do math, but generally, when you're drawing, you want to avoid math, because that's when we make mistakes. We're humans. And so whenever possible, we want to try to use systems in place that help us avoid that math. It also makes it easier if somebody else starts to look at your drawing, they can figure out, oh, that's a diameter, and they don't have to do the math to double the radius to get what the diameter is, if that's the important number. So all of this to say, watch what I'm about to do. So I need to create the distance between this center line and this point here. That is going to be that open volume that's going to create the hub of my wheel. I'm given that dimension as 20, which is actually would be the distance from here to its mate over here. So again, going back to my drawing, this point to this point, right, is 20. But I only have half of this geometry. Because I only have half the geometry, I don't want to have to do the math to divide 20 by 2. I want Fusion to do that math for me. So watch what I'm going to do. Start the sketch dimension tool. Selection order is very important here. So I'm first going to select the center line, and then I'm going to select either this line or this top point, doesn't matter which, and it's going to give me the dimension between those two. That should be 10, right? Because we're taking that total 20 and dividing it by 2. But I'm going to right click now. And when I do right click, it brings up this menu, and down here in the menu, there's this thing called diameter dimension. And that's what I'm going to click. I'm going to click diameter dimension, and you'll notice then it switches to allowing me to do the full distance. And so now here I'm going to type in 20, and that's going to give me that distance to the other side of that geometry. I'm going to repeat that same process. I'm going to click that vertical line. I'm going to click this point here. I'm going to start to pull away, right click, diameter dimension, and that's going to be 24. And I'm going to do this one more time. Vertical line, this outside line, right click, diameter dimension, and that wants to be 80. Oh no! What happened to my geometry? All right, so I did this on purpose, and even if I didn't do it on purpose, it's still okay. So if you look at what happened to my geometry, it took this line that I had originally drawn out here in my sketch, and it pulled it all the way over because it was defining that distance as 80 millimeters. And when I drew it, I wasn't really paying attention to distances at all, and so I obviously drew it much larger than 40 millimeters away from my center point. So if this happens, do not panic, right? All you need to do is hit escape to get out of whatever's active, and reorient your geometry. So I'm just going to take a moment to start to make my geometry look a little bit closer to what it should be. So I'm going to zoom in here a little bit, and I'm going to say, oh, well that, that's pretty shallow. So I'm going to click and hold on this point. So this is a click and hold, and I'm going to start to pull this over and pull it down. Okay, so that gets that back to normal. And then this line, I can't move because it's now been locked in with this dimension. So if I try to click on that line, I can't move it left or right. What I can do is I can move this line down here. So I'm going to hit escape to deselect that. I'm going to grab this line, click and hold, and I'm going to pull it back over. And all it does is kind of reinvert your geometry, and I can start to figure out where these things belong. Okay, so again, when you invert your geometry, don't panic. It's a really easy fix. We just pull those things back to normal, and we should be set. Okay, so I have these big dimensions. Now I can go in and start to deal with some of these other dimensions. So here we go. We have a dimension. I'm going to start my dimension tool. The thickness here is 5 units, 5 millimeters. The thickness here at the top is 4 millimeters. You'll see things are starting to get locked in here. I have a height here from this point to this point, and that is 40. And I have a height from this point to this point that is 29. Oh, now this is just a thing for me. I don't like to see my dimensions crossing. It's confusing what I'm looking at. So once you place your dimension, you can always click and hold and drag that dimension back so you can see what's going on. All right, so now you see we have a lot of black lines. These lines are still blue. It's because if you go back and look at my drawing, I actually have an 8-degree angle measurement here. So again, we're just going to do that angle dimension tool, click this point, click this line, sorry, click that line, position my dimension, and this is 8. Okay, and then I'm going to reposition that 8 so I can see it. All right, everything is now fully black, and I am done with my sketch. So that's what we want to do to finish that sketch up. You'll see there's a lot of these constraints. These are all mirrored constraints, so that's just showing me that things are mirrored from one another, and you can actually like pair up which ones are mirrored by selecting them. So if I like hover over this one, it'll show me that it's mirroring to this one down here. This one is mirroring to this one down here. You can see how these guys are all mirrored as you go, right? So it's showing you how those guys look. All right, so my sketch is finished. I'm going to click Finish Sketch. And here we go. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. And now the next step is to create the revolve. It's right here in my Create menu. So under Create, it's also here, Revolve. But I can just click the Revolve command. It's going to ask me for a couple things. One, it's going to ask me for the profile. So I'm going to come up here to the profile, click on Select. I'm going to click this blue field to select my profile. There we go. And then the next thing is the axis. This is the thing I'm revolving about. And so that is that vertical line I drew in my sketch, which is right here. You'll notice that those construction lines show up even though my sketch is turned off. So I'm going to click on Select for that, click that line. Angle here, I want to do a full. That would be pretty funny if my wheel was only 270 degrees. It would be a rough ride. So I'm going to do 360 degrees, and I'm going to do that and click OK. And lo and behold, we have the wheel geometry. Yay. So pretty easy, right? Very, very simple geometry. Last thing is that fillet, and that's going to be really easy to do. We're going to do one fillet command, and I'm going to show you a different way of doing fillet selections, just FYI. So fillet, under my Modify menu, click to invoke that, brings up my fillet menu. Ordinarily, it's asking me to select edges, faces, or features. So in the past, the few times we've done fillets, like I would have selected like this edge here and then this edge here. But because I have a uniform fillet on both this inside channel and that outside channel, I can actually just select that whole surface that intersects those two edges as one of my faces. I'm going to hold down Shift, hold down my scroll wheel, revolve around to the other side, and I'm going to select that other side as well. So now I have two options selected, and these guys have a radius of, I believe, 2. Yep, 2 millimeters. All right, and then I click OK. And then that puts that radius on every edge that that surface touches. Right, and we'll see that it happened on this side as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, that is how you make that wheel in Fusion 360. Hopefully you enjoyed that, and you're going to need this information to do the assignment, so hopefully you paid attention. All right, thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in another video. Have a great day.